First, by going over just the basics of how you do grassroots lobbying at the Capitol, because I think it'll help when we're going through the talking points, how to think about them and putting together the narrative that you want to have when you talk to legislators. The first thing is to be prepared and have an outline in your head of what you want to say. There's usually a limited amount of time, so it's really important to have your key points that you want to make. Sometimes you just have several minutes, sometimes it's longer, but to make sure that you hit the main points that you want to make with the legislator that you're talking to. Educate yourself to make sure that you know ahead of time what you're talking about, be able to answer basic questions. Often with legislators, you are the expert on this particular thing that you're talking about because they haven't spent nearly as much time thinking about it as you have. So remember that, and that's part of what we're doing here this morning, is to get prepared just with the basic information so that you feel like you're prepared to be a subject matter expert, so to speak, and to be able to answer questions. Never assume when you start talking to a legislator that, oh, this person already knows what I'm going to be talking about. Some of them do, some of them don't. So you need to be prepared to give them basic background about the issue you're talking about and why it's important. The other thing to keep in mind before you get started, and I think we are planning to organize into small groups to do our lobbying, particularly for the targeted list of legislators we're talking to. Decide beforehand who's going to do what, who's going to say what, who's going to introduce the conversation. If you want to split up the talking points because you feel more comfortable talking about this versus that, decide in the group who's going to do that. And another really important task while you're doing this is to make sure that somebody is taking notes, because you want to know after the fact, who did we talk to, what did they say, did they have any questions, does the group need to follow up with additional information for this legislator. Finding your legislator, if you haven't done this before, if you go up to the second floor rotunda, when you come off the steps, the Senate is on the left, the House is on the right. When they're in session, you're not allowed to go onto the floor, but there are doorkeepers at each door. There are slips there for you to fill out to request time with a particular legislator, so you just fill that out and the doorkeeper will bring it in for you. Usually if the person's available, they'll come out within a few minutes. So just make sure that you're listening, so you know, like when they come out, they might not know who you are and the doorkeeper might not remember you, so they'll call your name because it'll be written down on the slip. And sometimes it takes a little bit longer, so it's okay to send in more than one request at a time. Just make sure that you have enough people to cover if more than one legislator comes out all of a sudden, that you're able to talk to everybody. So that's just the basic logistics of how you get a legislator to come out and talk. The most important part to think about beforehand, I think, is how to deliver your message. Basics: introduce yourself. Make sure that you've told the legislator your name and where you're from. This is really important if you're a constituent, because they will want to know that. They always give more weight to people that are actually from their district, although everybody's, I think, voice counts as an Iowa voter, but make sure that you identify yourself at the beginning of the conversation. Make sure that you are getting to the point in a reasonably timely manner and being very clear about what it is that you're asking for from the legislator. What is the problem that you are asking the legislature to address? In this case, it's water quality, it's the master matrix, it's CAFOs. Why is this problem something that's important to you? This is where you tell your personal story, and this is something that really only you can do. People often underestimate how big of a difference it makes to actually show up, even at times when it feels like legislators aren't listening and not being responsive. You have an outsized impact just by being here and telling your story, and you are the only person that can tell your story. And so you really are, without even studying beforehand, the expert on your story, and that is what legislators want to hear from you. So make sure that you're able to explain why this matters to you personally as an Iowan, as a constituent. And then, why should this be important to the legislator? So think about this in a couple of ways. So you've explained to them why this is important to you personally. Why should it matter to them? Like, what do you want me to do about it? What are the larger consequences for the state, for that legislator's district, if they don't do something on this issue that you're talking about? So try to relate back to the legislator and their role as a lawmaker, as a public servant, so they understand why it's important to them on a broader scale, because they don't just represent you individually, they represent a larger group of people, and more generally supposedly, in some cases, are trying to represent the broader interests of the state of Iowa. Finally, and this is something that people often forget at the end, what is it that you are asking the legislator to do specifically? If there is a bill or a bill number, we mentioned that. In this case, there isn't one that's been introduced right now that we're talking about, but we anticipate that there will be. But we're making a very specific ask. We want a moratorium that is in place until we bring down the number of impaired waterways, until we deal with the master matrix. So make sure that you clearly express, this is how we are asking you to solve the problem. And that's always helpful because you've spent this time outlining the problem and why it matters to you and why it should matter to them. So what do you want them to do about it? You're actually bringing a solution to the table. That's very important. And it can be tricky depending on who you're talking to, but try not to leave the conversation until you've gotten some kind of commitment from them. How do they feel about the solution that you're proposing? What position do they take on it? Are they able to make a commitment to support you or not? The clearer a response you can get from them, the better it is for us to be able to do our work going forward. And then finally, after you are done lobbying, it's always a nice form to send a thank you note. Just a short email is fine. Saying thank you for meeting with us and reminding them of what you talked about, because they might meet with a number of people during the day or during the week. So just remind them this is the issue we talked about, and if they said that they would support us on it, say thank you for that and remind them that they said that. Or if they needed additional information, say somebody, Diane or whomever, will be following up with you to provide answers to the questions that you had. So that's the basics of lobbying.